The Wreck of the Deutschland, Part the Second. One could read this poem beginning with Part the Second before reading Part the First. And in fact, Hopkins wrote Part the Second first before he wrote Part the First. And it came about in this way. First, when he joined the Jesuit order, he declared that he would not write any more poetry. He didn't want to pursue an artistic career. He felt that it was in odds with his, becoming a priest, and for that reason, he put away all his past poetry, and for many months did not write anything. However, in 1875, there was a wreck of a ship, and Hopkins at the time was at St. Bynos in Scotland, in Wales, and he mentioned the tragedy to his supervisor and expressed his feelings about that. Because he read about it in the paper, and it involved a vessel that left Bremen, Germany, and was setting out for Philadelphia in the United States, and aboard were 5 nuns from the Franciscan order, and they were going to Philadelphia to work in a hospital, and when Hopkins read about the ship going down and the loss of the 5 souls, he said that it made a deep impression on him, more than any other account that he had ever read. And mentioning it to his superior, he said that the superior gave him permission to write about it if he felt that was something he wanted to do. And Hopkins said, "On this hint, I set myself to the task, and I produced one." So this is really his first foray into poetry on a serious level, because he is very experimental in the entire poem, as we'll see, and innovative in technique, with his use of symbolism, metaphor, rhythm, and structure. Everything is all brand new. And he breaks away from the old style of iambic pentameter, that would be like 5 beats per line, and goes back to what he said would be the Anglo-Saxon style of the Middle Ages. And he does that, okay? So we'll see how he pursues that. So the part 2 then begins with the stanza 11. And I'll go back and forth on the screen here. I was able to put a split screen up here. So this is the beginning of stanza 11, okay? We already did part 1, which was stanzas 1 to 10. So stanza 11 begins, "Some find me a sword, some the flange and the rail. Flame, fang, or flood goes death on drum, and storms bugle his fame. But we dream we are rooted in earth, dust. Flesh falls within sight of us. We, though our flower the same, wave with the meadow. Forget that there must the sour side cringe, and the Blair share come." So over here I have my interpretation of that. He gives an account of the wreck of the Deutschland. This is an introduction, and an account of how the 5 nuns faced their death. Stanzas 11 to 29 take us through the events of the tragedy, with a particular focus on the tall nun and her significance to the theme of the poem. And then the last 6 stanzas bring the poem to a conclusion with a prayer. Interesting enough, the mention of the tall nun She becomes our main focus in the middle to the end of the poem in part 2. And her name is never given, and it reminds me of Stephen Crane in The Red Badge of Courage, when Henry, the main character, is experiencing the nuances of battle, and people don't have their own personality. He sees them as like the tall soldier, or the wrinkled soldier, or the tattered soldier. Everyone he sees, they're just what he sees before him, but not giving them a personhood. So when he speaks of the tall nun, she's singled out from the five, and all of our thoughts revolve around her. All right, so having read stanza 1, I'll explain. The opening lines are the introduction, spoken by the voice of personified death. And death is telling us some of the various ways that people are brought to him. And we have the image of the sword, meaning war. Hopkins often refers to the negative effects of the Industrial Revolution as well in his poems, in his environmental poems. And here he speaks of the flange and the rail, and that would be in regards to a boat or a ship, the flange and the rail, the train, referencing modes of transportation such as steamships and trains as killing agents, in addition to other agents such as animals, the fang, and the flood, which is appropriate because this is about the flood and the storm. Storms, too, bugle deaths, fame. All right? So these last two details seem appropriate because they prepare us for the deaths of the passengers aboard, and especially the 5 nuns who die as a result of the storm while aboard this seagoing vessel. He tells us that in line 5 that we try to deceive ourselves by believing that we are invincible to the hand of death. In other words, we forget about the fact that we too will die. When we see about us people whom we are close to and they die, but we move on, not thinking about our own death. We dream we are rooted in the earth, even though we are constantly surrounded by deaths of others like ourselves, people like ourselves. And I love the imagery here. He says, though our flower is the same. Now he's talking about a field of wheat waving in the sun, and we're part of that field along with those others who have died. We forget that the side that clears the meadow will one day bring us down with as well, okay? And the Blair share will come. He uses a poignant detail in the form of a metaphor, saying that we wave with the meadow, okay, almost like oblivious to our forthcoming death, forgetting that one day we will be leveled as well, the leveling of the sight. The meadow is a nice image of mankind because it's rooted in the earth, and from dust we are, to dust we return. So but we are advised that Hopkins is advising us that the day will come when the side will bring us down along with the others in the meadow. So going back to the other poem over here, we wave in the meadow, forgetting that there will come the sour side cringe, and the Blair share comes. So those words, Blair share, meaning our death too. Now he goes on to the specifics of the story. Don't forget, it's a narrative here. So he tells us, on Saturday, sailed from Bremen. That's an abbreviation of, I think it was Birmingham, or something like that, in Germany. The American outward bound vessel, taking settlers and seamen, tell men and women, 200 souls in the round, "Oh, Father, not under thy feathers, nor ever as guessing the goal was a shoal of a fort, the doom to be drowned." Yet did the dark side of the bay, thy blessing, not vault them, the millions of rounds of thy mercy, not reave even them in. Okay, so the first part here, he tells us, the details. But then down here, he's speaking to God, saying that you did not protect them, not under the feathers of your mercy did you encompass them, all right? He says that the goal, American bound, was a shoal, okay? That's a sandbar. And notice the sound, goal of the shoal, okay? Of a fourth, 25% of the passengers aboard were doomed to drown, okay? Yet, and then here, in these two lines, he speaks about God could have saved them, easily, but the dark side of the bay of thy blessing not vault them. In other words, they jumped over that to their death, okay, their salvation. They vaulted, all right, them. The millions of rounds of thy mercy didn't, encapture them and bring them in. Okay, so I'll explain that over here. We're on to stanza 12. The stanza begins with the characteristics of a good newspaper story, giving the who, the what, and the where, and the when. Okay, passengers aboard, going to America from Germany, when, okay. Hopkins provides us with the necessary details to create his narrative. 200 souls left Bremen, Germany, the port of embarkation, setting out for America with settlers and seamen, men and women, 1/4 of whom would drown on a shoal just off the coast. And then, as I said over here, the last 4 lines, Hopkins expresses his thoughts regarding the tragedy. Addressing God, he says that even though there were so many innocent souls aboard, God did not extend his mercy to them by saving them from this terrible fate. He did not vault them, the million of rounds of thy mercy, not reeve even them in. The string of thought began with the image of God as a, protective bird, his feathers, with the words, O Father, not under thy feathers, not vault them. In other words, God did not fasten them in under his protection. He allowed them to go to their fate. This, of course, raises the question so often asked, why does God allow terrible things to happen to good people? It is stated again in these words, yet the dark side of thy blessing did not vault them, meaning that it did not leap over them or escape them. Okay, the dark side of his blessing, that would be he allowed them to go to their deaths. All right. Okay, we're back here now. So he says, into the snows she sweeps the boat, hurling the haven behind, the safe harbor, hurling it behind her, the ship. The Deutschland on Sunday, and so the sky keeps, for the infinite air is unkind, and the sea flint-flake black-backed in the regular blow, sitting east-northeast in the cursed quarter, the wind wiry and white fiery, and whirlwind swiveled snow spins to the widow-making, unchilding, unfathering deep. All right, a lot of beautiful imagery in there, especially of the snow. So over here, it's a graphic description of the fierce wintry weather that pelted against the vessel as it distanced itself farther away from the sheltering harbor. All right, the freezing rain and the pelting snow is described as flint-like. Now, flint is something very hard, so it'd be almost like hail, hitting you in the face. And the wind is wiry and white fiery, a whirlwind swiveled snow. Okay, so you can imagine that it is coming down fast and furiously, making deeps or drifts aboard the ship. Hopkins suggests a darker mood with the descriptive words saying that They were widow making, okay, and unfathering the children. You know, the fathers were going to their deaths. So nature's cruel onslaught has no pity on those aboard. All right, and so besides the content, meaning of what's happening, he's using a lot of beautifully constructed style here of elements of poetry. His sprung rhythm, which counts the stressed and accented syllables, but permits any number of unstressed syllables. Unlike iambic pentameter, where you have that 5 beat per line, but he's using, bang, bang, bang is happening. She beats the bank down with her bows and rides on the keel. You can hear the 5 beats in that line, but it's more than 10 syllables long. So that's happening here too. Now, I'll read this explanation of the next line before I read the line. Hopkins gives the graphic description of the ship's collision with a shoal or an underwater sandbank that stops the vessel on the Kentish Knock. We are told that the vessel beat the bank down with the right of her keel. You hear those 5 bangs. The heavy surf then attacked the ship, beating on its beam or wide hull with ruinous shock. All right, the last 2 lines of the stanza speak of the ship's grim status, saying that its wheel will be forever idle, along with the effectiveness of its sail and its compass. These lines, and canvas and compass, the world and the wheel, idle forever to waft her or wind her, with these she endured. Okay, and the last 3 lines, these are what she sustained, all right, and it sounds like an autopsy. These she endured give the image of a victim that has been sustained injuries from an assault, in this case the sea and the storm. So let's go back to that stanza. She drove in the dock to leeward. She struck not a reef or a rock, but the combs of a smother of sand. Night drew her dead to the Kentish Knock, and she beat the bank down with the bows and the ride of her keel. The breakers rolled on her beam with ruinous shock. The canvas and compass, the whirl and the wheel, idle forever to waft her or wind her, with these she endured. If we remember back in the line 11, when Death talks about ways of people coming to the flange, that's part of the ship, and the rail, part of the train. So here we have an example of that in this particular incident. All right, then he moves on, saying these people were, swept off the ship. Some of them were still aboard the deck, fighting for their lives, and any sense of hope was growing dim. But he uses an image, saying hope had grown gray hairs, passage of time. Hope had mourning on, Emily Dickinson says hope is a thing with feathers. Well, in this case, hope personified is wearing mourning for the death of the passengers. Trenched with tears, carved with cares, hope was 12 hours gone. Okay, so it'd be 30 hours before these passengers had any sign of rescue. But after 12 hours, nothing. Okay, and then there was a light ship nearby that was notified of the wreck, but could not come to its rescue because it was stationary. So it was firing rockets. And it says this, in frightful a nightfall, folded rueful a day, no rescue, only rocket. See, the ship was sending up these rockets. And light ship shone, and lives at last were washing away. So you have an image of, the passengers being swept off the deck into the cruel ocean. To the shrouds they took. That would be the ropes of the ship, the rigging. And shroud, of course, has a connotation of death, too. You put a shroud over a dead body. So to the shrouds, to the rope they took, they shook in the hurling and horrible airs. So here he gives a graphic description of the ship's collision with a shoal or underwater sandbank that stops the vessel off the Kentish knot. We are told that the vessel beat the banks down with the right of her keel. The heavy surf then attacked the ship, beating on its beam or wide hull with ruinous shock. The last two lines of the stanza speak of the ship's grim status, saying that its wheel will be forever idle along with the effectiveness of a sail because it was ripped to shreds, and the compass is useless now, because it's going down into the deep. The description sounds like an autopsy, as I said. The last three lines, these she endured, give the image of a victim who has sustained injuries from an assailant. All right, the fate of the passengers has grown dim. Any hope of salvation aboard has lessened considerably with the passage of time. Hopkins uses a metaphor personifying hope, saying its hair had turned gray and it was wearing symbols of mourning already for the lost souls. We are told that 12 hours had already passed, no sight of help. The only sign of humanity nearby was that of a lightship, which served as a lighthouse, and despite its sending alarm rockets into the night sky, people were perishing aboard the Deutschland. And Hopkins refers to the ropes as shrouds, part of the ship's rigging, making the association of burial cloths. Okay, so I'll read 16 first. I'll do the analysis before I read the line. This stanza describes a somewhat morbid scene in which one sailor, who in an attempt to save himself, has tied a rope around his waist, and he climbed the rigging. And then suddenly a blast of wind swept him off the place where he is standing, and he swung around, but he heard the cries of the women below, and he began to lower himself to come to their rescue, and that's when the wind battered him and kept smashing him against the mast, and then he eventually dies, but his body is left swinging in the fierce winds that buffeted the ship. So a horrible scene. This guy is like a pendulum, swinging in the night air, and the snow all swirling about him. And Hopkins uses the word dandled. He was dandling off the rigging, and that's like a seesaw. You dandle. Little children dandle on it, and they call it a dandle. So it's kind of grotesque, between the usual image of dandling, and then he uses it to describe this poor sailor swinging around up there in his dead body, tied by the rope. Hopkins uses colorful description, calling the ocean waves cobbled foam, fleece. Well, they're bubbly and they look like cobblestones, but cobbled also suggests cobblestones and there's hardness, okay? So it's like hail beating against you. The sailor's courage is described in these words: dreadnought breast, in other words, no dread, and his muscular physique, braids of thew, muscles, suggesting his muscles. The overall effect is hideous. The body dangling from the rigging as the waves pounded against the rigging, and fountains of crashing water and buck and flood of the wave. Okay, so that's what he has over here. And we'll go back to the actual stanza. One stared, this is the sailor I'm talking about, from the rigging to save the wild womankind below, with a rope end round the man, handy and brave. He was pitched to his death at a blow, and all his dreadnought breast and braids of thew. They could tell him for hours. Tell means they could envision him. They could see him, He was within their vision, dangling there, dandled to and fro through the cobbled foam fleece. What could he do with the burl of the fountains of air, the buck and the flood of the wave? Okay, so he uses that word foam fleece in another poem, Inversnade, where he's describing the water coming down, and he says it was fleeces of foam, So it looked like fleece, sheep, the wool of the sheep, okay, and it's a foam because of the torrents of waves smashing against the ship. And then I'll move on. They fought with God's cold. Notice he blames the cold on God. And they could not, and fell to the deck. They could not, contend with it. Crushed them, or water, and drowned them, or rolled with the sea romp over the wreck. Night roared with the heartbreak, hearing a heart-broke rabble. The women's wailing, the crying of a child without check. And then now we introduce the main character. Till a lioness rose, breasting the babel, a prophetess towered in the tumult, a virginal tongue told. Okay, so there he leads up to the climax of this part of the story. So amidst all of this tumult and riotous activity, the noise and the horrible things going on the deck and above the deck and outside and in the water, suddenly we are told a lioness arose amidst the babel. Okay, the rabble, in this case, the rabble. So he calls that's the nun, of course, the tall nun, a prophetess, okay, towering in the tumult, and then a virginal tongue. So she took the vow of virginity in joining the sisterhood, becoming a nun. Prophetess, one who speaks the words of God from the Old Testament. So that's what we have here. And we go over here now. The viewpoint now shifts to the scene of the panic-stricken multitude on the deck, called a heart-broke rabble, as they fought with God's cold. We are told that they fell to the deck as the sea rolled over them, crushing and drowning them. Women wailed, children screamed without check, no end. Amidst this scene of pandemonium, we are told a lioness arose, breasting the babel, describing her as a towering prophetess in the tumult, told, key word here, told. We'll work with that word afterwards, okay, because it becomes very important. We do not know what her words were at this juncture. The reference to her being a lioness makes an association of the image of Christ as the Lion of Judah, suggesting that the prophetess in tumult is a Christ-like figure. Tumult. This is the first reference to the tall nun, which the rest of part second is going to be focused on, not saying at this point what she told her words would be kept in abeyance for a while, followed by Hopkins pondering on their meaning, followed by a syntax-twisting prayer to Christ. Okay, so it's a good point to stop at because this is very long. The 35 stanzas are only 18 here. So I'm going to pause here and end this section of part the second.